This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more particularly beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Correllian tradition, and this is Midday with Reverend Don. And welcome. I'm happy to have you here. We're going to have a lovely conversation, and this is one of my favorite parts of the day. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can communicate directly by typing your questions or comments on whatever platform you may be watching the program on, and they will appear in my chat room, and we can interact in real time. And I find that adds so much to this experience, and I hope that you feel the same. So our subject today is interesting people that I have known in my career as a pagan leader and psychic. And I'm going to talk about different interesting people I have known. Hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room. Good to see you, Mary. And we'll see how many we have time for. And if there's anyone in particular you want to know about, feel free to ask about them. Hello to Janet Winston in the chat room. Good to see you, Janet. And, you know, I've known a lot of people. I've been here a long time. I want to start, however, by reminding everyone that I am available for readings. And once again, I'm going to extend a 20% discount to anyone who would like to book a reading and references this program. I will give you a 20% discount if you do so between now and Saturday. That is to say, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. And you can do that by instant messaging me through Facebook or Instagram, or by writing to me at donlewishd@aol.com and setting something up. Also, I want to take a moment to reference my Patreon at revdonlewis.com. And you can, if you want to support me in my work, becoming a patron at Patreon is one of the best ways to do that. And we offer a lot of perks. This month, I think our most fascinating thing was the evening with the Correllian ancestors, which we do plan to do again. And also our seminar, which in this month had to do with mediumship and oracular work. Next month, our Patreon seminar will deal with lessons from the Parliament of the World's Religions, because the Parliament will have occurred by then. And I'll be talking about things that happened there and things I learned there. And then the following month, the seminar will happen on September 30th, Saturday, September 30th, 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern, and it will deal with seances, what they are, how to do them, what dangers are involved. And hello to Kazan, Bradley, and Antonio in the chat room. Good to see you all. And I think this is a fascinating subject. I will also this month, in the month of October, be offering seances again. The first will be offered on Saturday, October 7th. And you can get tickets to that, as well as to the Patreon seminar if you're not a member of my Patreon at the seminar level at CorrellianPublishing.com. And Janet asks, is this the time of year to see shadows? Because I've been seeing them out of the corner of my eye. I don't know that I'd say there's a time of year more lent to that than others. If there were, I'd say it's a little bit more in line with the fall. I would say this probably has to do with something going on in your own life. And, you know, not knowing any more, I would say perhaps it might be a bit of a psychic opening, maybe things happening in your house. But I don't think I'd say it's a particular time of year that's affecting it. And hello to Mary Cavalcante, hello to Ravenwolf, hello to everyone in the chat room. And so interesting people I've known. You know, I've talked about some of those interesting people in previous shows, and I may revisit some of those same people, such as Olivia Robertson or Pete Pathfinder Davis during this half hour. But I also want to deal with some of the people I've not spoken as much about. I think I'm going to start with my mother. I have to say my mother is one of the more interesting people I have known. She was a woman from a family of mixed racial ancestry. She had a number of challenges in her life. Her childhood was very colorful. And her husband, my father, was a handful. But through all of that, she kept her composure and her balance. And what I learned from dealing with my mother was how to deal with everything while maintaining your own center and your own calm. And that is a skill that not everyone has, and it's very, very important. Hello to Maggie in the chat room. It's good to see you, Maggie. Looking forward to seeing you at the Parliament. That ability to center in yourself, to know who you are, to remain grounded. I don't have it as much as she had it, but it has served me so well in life. And the other great thing I took away from her, from having known her, is how to be patient and understanding with people, how to be a good listener. Vitally important skill. My mother was a beloved individual. One of the biggest reasons is that she had time for other people, she listened to other people, she cared about other people. Whatever may be going on in her own life, she always tried to make that time if others needed her. And the last thing I'll say about her, she loved the saying that you must take people where you find them, meaning that you can't expect people to necessarily conform to where you are. You have to consider where they are, because they may not be able to understand anything but where they are. And so if you can speak their language, they can understand you. If you will consider their position, then they can better understand you. If you try to simply force them to accept where you're standing, you're usually just going to end up at an impasse. And this was perhaps the greatest lesson she taught me. All of these things were great lessons she taught me. So she was a huge influence on me. And I could talk at great length about her life. I believe I did during the Evening with the Correllian Ancestors. And if you're on my Patreon, you can still access that. It was video taped and remains available. But I think this is all I'm going to say in this format. These were the strongest lessons that she taught me. And what truly made her interesting, I think, was how she interacted with people, and especially how she dealt with people who were difficult and still managed to do so with love and patience. Another person who I've often referenced on this program, who is one of the most interesting people I've ever known, was Rosemary Fletcher. Rosemary, Novella Suter, and I were kind of like the Three Musketeers at one point at the J&M Psychic Fair Circuit. And both Rosemary and Novella were fascinating people. Novella was fascinating for her ability to command attention, to empathize with people, she had a very strong Mother Earth quality about her, while also being a very glamorous individual. And hello to Calvin in the chat room. Good to see you, Calvin. And it was, Sared once said of Novella that what made her one of the primary stars of the J&M Psychic Fair Circuit was that for 10 minutes, she would be your best friend on earth in your reading with her. Listen and sympathize to everything and give you the support that you wanted. And she did have that quality, whether in a reading or otherwise. Lovely person. But Rosemary was a much less outgoing person than Novella. Hello to Samantha in the chat room. And a very deep person. She had studied so many different kinds of reading. I don't think I've known anyone who had a wider range of reading. And just when you thought you knew everything she could do, something else would be thrown into the mix. And she was constantly expanding things. She did things, for example, like match her clothing to the auspicious energies of the day. She worked with astrology and palmistry and cards and clairvoyance and psychometry, and you name it, she could work with it. And of all the readings I've ever gotten or heard of, the reading that she did for Sir Edward predicting the daily newspaper going out around the world, it's the most accurate one I have personal experience of. She did not have the words to say this is going to be on the internet, because the internet was not a thing yet for most people. But she perfectly predicted what was about to happen. So Rosemary is very high on my list of interesting people. Another interesting person is L. Edward Lawrence, also known as Merlin the Enchanter. And hello to Jeanette Lugabulio in the chat room. It's good to see you, Jeanette. Lawrence was the head of the House of Lawrence. He was the proprietor of the Lawrence Museum of Magic and Witchcraft, the editor of the Grave Robbers Gazette magazine, a world-class raconteur who loved to tell endless stories and was an endless font of information. He'd spent his life studying. He's one of those people who had success in multiple careers and many adventures. And he was just a fascinating person to talk to. His family was fascinating. Distant relatives of my own. If anything, even more colorful than my colorful family. And it was fascinating to interact with this man. He also had lived a life similar to my own. I have talked about how since retiring in office, I've lost a tremendous amount of weight and lost it quickly without even trying. And I really do believe this was the weight of the office that I had carried all my life. Merlin Lawrence appeared to have the same thing. He was very heavy. He was having heart problems very similar to those I've experienced, but he was carrying a family legacy that was very heavy. He did put it down in 1989, the same year my mother crossed into spirit. And I hope that it had a positive effect for him to put that down. And hello to Magical Mermaid. And Mary in the chat room says, it's hard to believe his family could have been more colorful than yours. And yet they were. Well, in some ways. And we were equally matched in others. And hello to Brian in the chat room. It's good to see you, Brian. So Lawrence, he is one of those very colorful people I have known, very fascinating people I have known. L. Edward Lawrence, that is Lawrence Edward Lawrence, also called Merlin the Enchanter. And I think I will tell just one little story about him. And hello to Gary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Gary. In the foyer of his home, which included many of the exhibits for the museum, although it also had outbuildings that contained the main exhibits. But in the foyer, there was hanging from the ceiling a large brass ball on a chain. And he would tell the story of how he greatly angered someone who visited his museum, because they explained to their students they brought with them how this was a geomantic pendulum and a fascinating example. And then he said, well, yeah, but you know, this is a plumbing artifact that I thought was cool. It was not, in fact, a pendulum. And that does kind of sum him up, including his rather unique sense of humor. Hello to Janet Gann in the chat room. It's good to see you, Janet. Lady Bitterwind, probably the most fascinating person that I will mention today. She saw the world through her own set of eyes. And she'd been raised that way by her father, who wanted her to think critically, and to second guess the messages of society. And she did her whole life. I and the entire Corellian tradition gained so much philosophical insight from Lady Bitterwind. The only person I think I've learned more from is Sir Edward. But Lady Bitterwind, she had a lot of ideas that were very important. One of her big beliefs is that government is a living being. And of course, she also believed that the earth is a living being, everything is a living being. But she believed that organizations and governments were also living beings. She wrote a fascinating article about this, in which she proved it using what were then the standards for whether something was living or not. She believed that governments were living things and not necessarily beneficent. And Gary in the chat room remarks that Bitterwind had a lot of amazing insights, and yes, she did. Her other thing that she was very big on, she believed that a lot of pagans, when they said they worshiped nature, worshiped the Walt Disney Bambi version of nature, not actual nature. She believed if you wanted to understand deity, you look at the natural world, because that's where deity's handiwork is most visible. And if you look at the natural world, it is a complex balance in which life feeds on death. These things are necessary for life, for that balance to continue. She felt that the cycle of predation and prey within nature was something that, if you truly want to honor nature, you must be aware of and honor. And it is a hallmark of her teachings to look to nature for instruction. And Jim in the chat room, hello Jim, says nature is very unforgiving and not a respecter of persons. And this is true. And its purpose is much larger than us as individuals. You know, when I've spoken at length, I have, on the subject of divine justice. I'm a believer in divine justice. I just don't think there's any reason to think that it resembles what we think of as humans in terms of justice. The divine has a different point of view that takes into account many things beyond our pleasure. And very often when humans are talking, what they mean by justice is getting their own way. This is also something that I would have to credit Lady Bitterwind with having taught me. Lady Bitterwind was an adopted member of the High Corel family, but I knew her from childhood. She greatly influenced my points of view. Brian says, I would like to hear more about divine justice at some point. Perhaps we can make that the subject of one of these programs. And hello to Aiden in the chat room. Aiden Greenwood, good to see you. And Magical Mermaid says, yes, I had to learn that. It took a long time. It does. When we talk about things like karma, we have to remember that if we're talking about divine lessons, divine justice, and things like that, we can't expect it to be from our perspective as mortal beings. Perhaps our higher self, but not our perspective as mortals. And hello to Champagne in the chat room. It's good to see you. Lovely name. All of these things come from Lady Bitterwind in my reference. And she was always pointing out the things you don't think of. She and Sir Edward were very much alike in that way. She would see what no one else saw, and it was a very valuable thing. And Brian says, karma runs on its own calendar in Hawk, and yes, it does. And again, it doesn't necessarily run on our expectations. Many years ago, I read a book. I think I still own it. I think it survived the purging of my library, but it was the dramatization of the original Battlestar Galactica made for TV series, which will tell you where I was at in 1978. I loved the original, and so I bought the novel. The novel is somewhat different, but there's a single line in there out of that whole novel that I remember all these years later. In the novel, the characters have come to what appears to be an almost perfect situation for themselves on a world where they're welcome and being catered to for their every want and need. Except that the character of Commander Adama doesn't trust it. And he makes the comment that when people think of paradise, they're thinking, or if they think of perfection, they're thinking of having their immediate needs met and nothing further. And that is not what perfection is. And that I have always remembered. Hello to Arlene in the chat room. Good to see you, Arlene. We have to remember that our thoughts, desires, and expectations are from our mortal perspective, and not assume that immortal deity in any of its forms necessarily has that same perspective. Because just to start with, its perspective is from the point of view of eternity. So Lady Bitterwind, one of the most fascinating people I've ever known. Lady Olivia. I am going to come back and mention Lady Olivia and also Lady Dina, I think, in this survey of fascinating people. Lady Olivia was one of the 3 founders of the Fellowship of Isis. Wonderful woman. And Jim says, not to backtrack, I jumped in just as you mentioned Lady Olivia. Great minds think alike. I truly find her contributions to ritual drama as well as oracular work to be profound. I think the FOI has greatly influenced my own practice and outlook. I totally agree. But I am, by the way, an archpriest of Isis. Among other my various other dignities. I have been in the Fellowship of Isis since 1986, I believe. Also a knight, commander of the Noble Order of Tara, and various other Icean dignities. Lady Olivia, I would have to say, was one of the most, well, as Jim says, she added tremendously to the world heritage of ritual and liturgy. The way she constructed the Icean liturgy, I would have to say, is largely unlike anything else you'll encounter in Western paganism, at least at the level that she did it. Her breadth of education was breathtaking. I have a pretty good classical education. She could run rings around me. Not many people I'll say that about. I was educated at a time that things like Greek and Latin language and culture were still considered important. Consider yourself an educated person. She even more so. And so the Icean liturgy has such broad and deep connections. It's breathtaking. Her work deserves to be as world-striding as it is. But what made her a fascinating person to me is a combination of, well, it's her personality and her skill as a politician. And these two things are right together. I've heard people refer to Olivia as a daffy old lady. I believe that she liked for people to see her that way. She was actually extremely sharp and a great strategist, and she thought deeply. But she enjoyed being perceived as a little old lady, a classic eccentric, and she played into that image. And because of that, people underestimated her. So on a political level, she was very savvy. She knew how to handle herself. And she knew the importance of presentation and of considering your presentation according to the effect you want to have. And she always had that effect, and she was deeply beloved and revered by the Icene people, and still is, all these years after her crossing. To all intents and purposes, I would say that she is a deified ancestor, and she absolutely deserves that role. Fascinating woman, pleasure to spend time with. I remember there is a book, we may have sold it, but I don't know for certain that we did, called The Call of Isis. And it remarks on the subject of Lady Olivia that she would often come out with startling non sequiturs. And she would. Something would catch her attention, she'd remark upon it, and that conversation would not be the same again. Because her mind was always working. And she was just a fascinating person. And so many people in her organization, such as Laura Jane's daughter, Linda Isles, DeTracy Regula, Dina Buddha, Demetria Nanos, all fascinating people. And we're nearing the end of the hour. I can't go through all of them. And we knew when we started I couldn't get through very many of the fascinating people I've known. But I think I'm going to finish with Pete Pathfinder Davis. And if you don't know who Pete Pathfinder Davis was, he was the founder of the Aquarian Tabernacle Church, whose current archpriestess, Belladonna Laveau, is also a fascinating person. But Pete was arguably the most effective pagan leader of his generation. And the reason was that he had had a whole life dealing with law and politics and the real world before becoming a pagan leader. And he knew how to work with the powers that be. He did not allow himself to be controlled by the things he did not want to be, but focused rather on what he did want to be, and he achieved it. He was a great believer. He was a great mentor to me, and he created an extremely effective organization by using these skills, by not reinventing the wheel, but learning how to adapt the wheel to his vehicle. And I cannot too greatly stress the importance of that lesson. He was a fascinating person to deal with. He was a font of information, always a fascinating conversation when you were speaking to him. I've heard people describe him as irascible. I suppose he was. I never thought of him that way, but that's probably because we got along so well. He was certainly outspoken. I suppose he actually was rather irascible, but again, I never thought of him that way. But he was dedicated to his cause, and he achieved his goals, like all of these people, but with particular acumen. So with that, we've come to the end of our half hour. I hope that you have enjoyed this subject. Perhaps we'll revisit it. Thank you all for being here. I love you all. I love spending this time of day with you. I'm deeply grateful that you seem to love spending it with me. And you know, as I move into the grandfather portion of my life, I will probably be the kind of grandfather who tells endless stories, and I'm enjoying telling them to you. And I hope that you're enjoying your time with Grandpa Don. And I love you all, and let us close as we always do with our prayer. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do in our lives, and we ask you to help us to treasure the special people that we know, to learn from them the lessons that they bring us, to remember that everyone we know blesses our life. Some bless it by coming into our lives, some bless us by going out of our lives, but everyone brings a blessing. And help us to grow internally from all those people who cross our paths, and to help them to grow as well. And through all our acts to make the world a better place as best we can. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and with respect, and knowing you are always with us, yet from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. I love you all. I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And until then, may you be blessed now and always.